Hello and welcome to the introduction to ASCOT. This pre-recorded presentation provides a basic overview of the ASCOT and should be used to support the reading materials and references that are available in the references section of the ASCOT website. So the aims of this presentation are basically to address the frequently asked questions that we have around ASCOT, including things such as what is it and why do we think it's helpful, what exactly it aims to measure and how, and finally outlining the way it can be used to estimate the impact of services on people's care-related quality of life. So ASCOT stands for the Adult Social Care Outcomes Toolkit. It is essentially a collection of tools for measuring the outcomes of service users and their family unpaid carers. Guidance is available on our website for those who want more detailed information, and we have a series of different pre-recorded presentations about the different measures, including the carer measures and their domains, the Easy Read measure and the Mixed Methods Care Homes Toolkit. For the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the general principles behind the ASCOT and take you through the scores that can be derived using the different ASCOT measures. Okay, so why use ASCOT? Well, I'm assuming that in listening to this presentation you've already considered that you want to use ASCOT in some capacity. There's currently a lot of interest in ASCOT because of the wider international policy emphasis around measuring the outcomes of care. However, most quality of life measures were not designed specifically with the intention of measuring care-related quality of life. This means they're not necessarily sensitive to the effects of social care services or interventions, although of course most quality of life measures will be relevant in some capacity. ASCOT, however, is sensitive to social care interventions, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a minute. As well as being sensitive to the intervention, some ASCOT tools include an innovative approach to estimating the impact of services on people's care-related quality of life. Again, this is something that I'm going to outline in more detail in a moment. Thinking more generally, for a measure to be considered suitable for use in research policy and practice, it's important that it's been tested with the right audiences. So in this case, adults using social care services. And it's also important that it measures the concepts it claims to measure. ASCOT has undergone rigorous development and testing with different user groups across a whole range of service settings. The references for this development and testing are available in the references section on the ASCOT website. Finally, many tools for measuring quality of life treat the outcomes of the various aspects of quality of life as being equal. This means that they assume that the best or worst state in one area of quality of life is the same as the best or worst state in another. ASCOT does not do this. We conducted a preference study with both the general population and service users in England and asked people to make judgments between the different quality of life states using ASCOT. This very technical and in-depth work told us that people do not value their outcomes in different aspects of quality of life equally. Some are more important than others. To reflect these important differences or values, ASCOT can be preference weighted, which means it is particularly useful for anyone conducting economic evaluation. Those of you particularly interested in understanding this work should refer to the Health Technology Assessment paper written by Professor Anne Netton and colleagues, which is listed in the references section of the website. So this next section is going to look at how ASCOT measures outcomes and what we mean by that. ASCOT specifically measures social care-related quality of life. And those are the domains of quality of life that we think are most reasonably affected by social care. However, from our point of view when we started development, we felt it was also really important that ASCOT was broad enough to apply to everyone regardless of whether they receive care services, because this would enable comparison with, say, the quality of life of people in the general population, which we thought was something that was really important to do. ASCOT also measures quality of life at the level of the individual. Those scores can of course be aggregated to create means for services, for providers at the local authority level and at the general population level. But essentially the data is collected at the level of the individual. So what doesn't it measure? Well, it isn't a generic quality of life measure. It isn't something very broad. It is very specific to social care or long-term care. It doesn't measure health outcomes, such as pain, anxiety or depression. There are other measures that do that already, that you can use alongside ASCOT. It doesn't measure service use. Carrying out the ASCOT alone will not tell you what services somebody uses or how much of that service they use. It doesn't matter satisfaction with care services. Satisfaction is something that, although highly correlated with service user outcomes, is something slightly different and that you would again want to measure alongside. ASCOT doesn't measure outputs and processes such as care hours, pressure sore management or use of restraints, which other measures such as Inter-A do. So what we recommend is that when you're thinking of conducting a research study or evaluating a service, and you're interested in these things as well, that you actually ask these additional questions alongside ASCOT, because they do something slightly different. Okay, so as part of this next slide, I'm going to take you through the ASCOT domains and give you a brief overview of what each domain is trying to measure. So these first four domains are what we call the basic domains of quality of life. They are personal cleanliness and comfort, which is really about how clean and presentable you are in appearance. This might include things like personal care, but also your clothes and how you are supported to present yourself in terms of your appearance, such as your hair, whether or not you wear makeup, whether you have facial hair and whether or not that's trimmed, and so on and so forth. Food and drink is the second domain. And this is not just about having enough food, but also having food that you like at regular intervals throughout the day. The next domain is safety. And this is about safety both within and outside of the home. It might include being and feeling safe, for example. For older people, they may answer this question and be thinking about safety in terms of falling. Younger adults may be thinking about safety in terms of their safety in the community, fear of crime maybe. And then there is clean and comfortable accommodation. This one is quite self-explanatory and really gets at whether your home environment is both clean, but not in terms of sterile, but clean, homely, but also comfortable. So it may be that people with care needs do need beds and chairs that meets their needs, and is that working for them? So those first four are about the basic domains of social care and quality of life. And these next three are what we call the higher order domains. So these are things that go beyond just what you need to stay alive, but if you like, you start to give you a life of quality. So this is social participation and involvement, which is about spending time with the people that you want to spend time with. That might be your family, friends. If you live in a care home, it could be the other residents, it could be staff and volunteers. So spending time with people, being sociable with the people you want to be sociable with. Then we have control over daily living. And this is about having choice and control over what time you get up, when you go to bed, what you do during your day, what you eat, what you drink, what you wear. So general control over what you do, but also over how people help you. And then we have occupation, which is not just about working in terms of, but more about being occupied. So how do you spend your time? Can you do the things you want to do? For older adults, this might be more about leisure activities or voluntary work. It might be more sedentary activities for some, such as reading books, knitting, watching TV, playing games. For other people, it might be more active, so going out to work, taking part in hobbies, and so on. It can be occupation in terms of what you do in the home, but also in terms of what you do outside of the home, because that's something that is being increasingly important and something that services are being encouraged to support. And finally, the final domain for ASCOT is dignity. And the reason that I set that particular domain aside from the others is because in ASCOT, dignity has a very specific meaning. It means how the way in which people treat you makes you feel. The way in which people treat you and how that makes you feel. And you can read more about these domains by registering on our website and downloading our guidance and materials. So now thinking about across those 8 domains, how do we measure the outcomes within them? So let's look at the outcome states. There are 3 or 4 outcome states per domain, depending on which tool you're using within the ASCOT toolkits. In the interviews and questionnaires, this is measured through self-report. So respondents will choose one of 4 options. In the care homes toolkit, which is mixed methods, evidence is actually collected by somebody who has been trained to make reliable ratings. And they collate that evidence through a process of triangulation. So starting with the 3 outcome states, broadly speaking, the top level, or the top 2 levels, depending on which measures you're using, are trying to capture a situation in which the person receiving services has no unmet needs in this area of their life. This might be because they are able to take care of their needs themselves, or because services are in place and meeting those needs for them. The next level down, which we call some needs, now this outcome state is trying to capture people who are experiencing some unmet needs in this area of their life, which is sufficiently important or frequent to affect their quality of life. This might be because they can no longer care for themselves in this area of their life, and they do not yet have any help or support in place to compensate for this need, or because services are not fully meeting their needs in this area. Finally, at the bottom, we have an outcome state called high needs. This level is trying to capture people who have high unmet needs in this area of their life. This might be because they no longer meet their own needs in this area and do not yet receive services to compensate for this, or because the services that they have already are not helping with this area of their life. The distinction between high needs and some needs is that high needs have a health implication, whereas some needs, it's about quality of life. Now, I mentioned earlier that this top level state, no needs, can be split into 2. Most ASCOT measures now have 4 outcome states per domain, which means that they split the broad no needs category on the previous slide into 2, ideal state and no needs. The difference between these 2 levels is that in the ideal state, the person's wishes and preferences are being met. So this fits really well with the philosophies of person-centred care or self-directed care, and also the policy agenda around personalisation. Services are increasingly expected to not just meet people's needs, but also meet them in a way that reflects the individual person's personal preferences. So this is the difference between the ideal state and no needs. So to summarise, most ASCOT measures have 4 outcome states per domain. The ideal state, where their preferences and wishes are being met. No needs, which is a kind of mustn't grumble. Some needs, it's affecting my quality of life. And high needs, it's affecting my physical or mental health. Okay, the next section is about moving from these domain states to derived scores. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. So there are 3 possible derived scores that can be produced using the ASCOT. Current social care related quality of life, expected social care related quality of life, and social care related quality of life gain. I'm going to talk you through each one individually. Now, current social care related quality of life measures what a person's life is like now, at the time of data collection. Usually, This will be with services already in place if they're an existing service user. But it might be that you're collecting ASCOT data in an assessment period before services are provided, in which case this will be their baseline quality of life before services are put in. So that one's the most straightforward one, if you like. The next one, expected social care quality of life. Now, a key issue in interpreting why a person might have a particular level of quality of life is that of attribution. An individual person's rating of quality of life can be influenced by a number of factors. Some of these factors might be related to long-term care support, whereas others are entirely unrelated. ASCOT aims to measure the impact of social care services and be sensitive to social care interventions. So how can the impact of social care be measured to the exclusion of those other unrelated factors in a person's life? A popular methodology for estimating the impact of interventions is the randomised controlled trial, or RCT for short. These kinds of studies aim to control for other factors experimentally to enable the research team to estimate the effect of a particular intervention. However, RCTs are not always possible due to time constraints or constraints of financial resources, for example, or even for ethical reasons. So a pragmatic alternative is to ask respondents directly how social care affects their quality of life by using what is known as a counterfactual self-estimation method. That is, that you ask service users themselves to rate their quality of life not only as it is at the moment, which is the current social care as quality of life, but also in an imaginary or expected situation in which their social care support and services are no longer available and no other help stepped in. The answer to these expected situation questions allow the calculation of the next point down, gain, which is the effect of services on the service user's quality of life. So the expected is only asked when people are already in receipt of social care services, because what we're actually asking them to do is imagine what your life would be like without those services. So this leaves us with the final point on this slide, which is gain. Gain is the difference between current social care related quality of life and expected social care related quality of life. It enables us to estimate the difference that services are having on the person's life. Not all versions of ASCOT measure expected social care related quality of life. Some only measure current. The next presentation in this webinar series, called Which ASCOT Tool, will touch on this and outline which ASCOT tools actually measure which of these derived scores, or enable you to calculate each of these derived scores. So do take a look at that next presentation if you think you particularly want to look at gain and the expected. So in summary, the ASCOT toolkit measures social care related quality of life. It is made up of 8 domains, and for each of these domains we look at a person's outcome states at 3 or 4 levels. Using this information, we can calculate both current and expected social care related quality of life, and from those derive an estimation of the impact that the service is having on that person's quality of life. So, there are different toolkits available for ASCOT. It can be used across different client groups and care settings. To help you work out which toolkit is best suited to your study or organisation, please take a look at the next presentation in this series, Which ASCOT Tool? And before I finish, I just need to draw your attention to the fact that the ASCOT support and development work carried out by the PSSRU and the ASCOT team is funded by the Quality and Outcomes of Person-Centred Care Research Unit, QUORU. QUORU is funded by the Policy Research Programme in the Department of Health in England. And the views expressed in this presentation are not necessarily those of the Department of Health. Thank you for listening.